Thank you so much for letting us record here at Studio 22. The space was amazing, and we are super excited to keep recording here. Thanks so much.
I'm introducing myself right now. So,
Go.
okay. Hey guys, welcome to the UNCUT podcast. My name is Anisha Apte, and if you guys do not know me, I am a junior. And my first 2 years, so my freshman and sophomore year, I was on the women's tennis team. And now I decided to switch it up a little bit, and now I'm a student assistant coach, which I am super excited about. So this podcast, I wanted to start to talk about the mental health in student athletes. I think it's a super important concept and something that's extremely overlooked. So with this podcast, I kind of want to have a raw, organic conversation with a student athlete, talking about their struggles, their experiences, everything that they're going through. So for our very first guest, we have Miss Fiona Campbell from Badger Women's Rowing. Let's give a round of applause.
Thank you.
Fiona, thank you so much for coming on. How are you feeling?
I'm a little nervous, not gonna lie.
Okay,
a little
that's
nervous.
Fair. I am too. Okay, so I think the first thing we'll start off with is some background questions. So for people to get to know you a little better, just quick fire, whatever comes off the top of your head.
Okay.
I got 12 of them for you.
Okay,
ready?
Okay.
Number 1, dream career.
Okay. Probably be something in the public health field where I'm working to ensure that everyone has equal access to education.
Love that. Okay. Skill you want to learn.
Piano.
Top of your bucket list.
Iron Man.
What?
An Iron Man.
Oh, I thought you meant the.
No.
Okay.
Yeah, like to
Okay.
complete an Iron Man.
Got you. Okay. Happy memory.
Last week when I drove to Starbucks with my friends after practice, we got $35 of free food, and we laughed about it the entire way back.
You and your Starbucks.
Yep.
Okay. First thing you do in the morning.
I contemplate what I'm doing up this early, and I text my friend Una that I'm so exhausted and don't want to go to practice.
Really? Okay. What do you wish you did more of?
Spend time with friends away from academics or phones.
Okay. Last 2. Earliest childhood memory.
When I was 2, I chipped my tooth running at a pool and it went all the way up in my gum. And then my dad had to take me to the urgent care, and I have a memory of him making me eat popsicles so my mouth could numb, so the doctors could try and use pliers to pull my tooth down. Yeah.
Okay. Last one. What is a trait that makes you you?
I think that I have an ability to make conversation with a lot of different people, and
I agree with that.
Yeah, and I think I'm very
I like
personable.
that. I agree with that. All right. So let's get started. Okay. We'll talk about you and rowing and everything.
Okay.
All right. So if I remember correctly, you did not get into rowing until you came here, freshman year.
Yes.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. So one kind of really cool aspect of rowing, especially within the Big Ten, is that they do have a historic program with walk-ons. And so they pride themselves, especially with the rowing programs within the Big Ten specifically, they pride themselves on their ability to take on walk-ons. And so especially at Wisconsin, that has always been a pretty notorious culture. And so right now our current head coach was a walk-on herself, and then my novice coach was also a walk-on. And so our sport is the one that needs to meet the quota to football, and so that's part of the reason why they take such a large freshman roster. And so that, and originally when I was in high school, my top choice was West Point, and so I knew I always wanted the physical challenge, and there was always kind of this void missing, and I always wanted a push coming from kind of some ulterior force. And so when I got to Wisconsin, I thought that rowing would fill that. And so I tried out, and the sport kind of picks its team for you. So we don't have that many cuts until you get to the varsity level. And just because of the grueling intensity that the sport carries and what it asks for, it picks and chooses who stays. And so I don't know, I always appreciate that, especially with rowing, you get what you put in. Right. And so you're kind of filled with people who want to work to be the very best they can of themselves and are willing to wake up every single morning at 5 a.m. and then get challenged every single day. And so I think with rowing, I really, really found a community that kind of helped make Wisconsin what it is for me.
And do you think, kind of going off of that, do you think rowing has filled that void for you of the physical rigor?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think so. Yeah, in a way that I didn't even know was possible. I mean, I think
Right.
now that there are ways that I can push myself and ways that I can compete that I didn't think would be feasible. And I think that rowing has filled that. I think it fills that in the mental capacity because it's just such a technically specific sport that, I mean, the point of it is that you want the boat, whether there are 8 people or 4 people or even 2, you want there to be such unison that you come together as one. And so I think that just doing something that's so technically sound, but then also something that requires such power and force and drive, I think is something that, I don't know, that there's always just something to kind of seek to achieve.
Okay, so I think we can move into your freshman year.
Mhm.
So let's start off with like how everything with rowing kind of happened and like all the physical rigor, because I know there's like a test. I wouldn't call it a test, but like
There is like varsity, but not really freshman.
yeah,
Like,
but
to
there's
get on.
like something that like you run or like I think
Where you
the
going?
combine.
Yeah,
Yes,
so the combine's varsity. Yeah.
Okay.
So freshman when I started off, they accept a lot of people. So I think there were like 80 people, right? And then by the very end of the year, there were 16 of us that raced at Big Tens, and so that was kind of a year of pretty immense growth. I mean, college is hard regardless getting into it. But I think rowing really helped me find and solidify a community of people that were very like-minded. And so by the end of it, I'd worked my way up. And so I competed in the top freshman boat at Florida and at Big Tens and at the regattas that we did in the spring. And it was awesome. Like I truly felt like I belonged. I felt like I was contributing. Like I felt worthy. Like I felt like I was respected. Like people could see, even though I was amongst the shorter, because I'm 5'6" and most people are like 5'10". I think people really did see me as someone that like they could compete against and as someone that could push them, and they saw me as their equal, and they saw me as someone that they were kind of proud to have as a teammate, and someone that they knew would be pushing just as hard as they would. And so I think I really felt a lot of pride and I felt a lot of respect from those in my boat, and it was really, really exhilarating kind of once. And granted, only right, it'd been like 8 months by the time we hit like April we were competing, but especially the boat I was in freshman year in the spring, we really came together, and it was truly awesome. Like it was there was a memory I have that I think is kind of one of the biggest things that pulled me through sophomore year is when we were in Florida and we were racing a bunch of we were racing like Stanford, Michigan, Ohio State, Duke, like just some of the top teams in the nation, and we were racing either their third varsity or their top freshman boat like we were, and we placed third, and like we beat one of our varsity boats as freshmen, and it was like the best feeling at the end because I knew it was just so euphoric, and it's just kind of something you constantly keep chasing.
I think also like the team, like everybody experiencing that like feeling
together,
that must be
so you're not
crazy.
alone in it,
Exactly,
exactly. So that was freshman year. So yeah.
All right, so freshman year is good. It's great.
Yeah.
You have your feeling of community within rowing and in Wisconsin, and so now going into sophomore year, what is that? What was the transition freshman to sophomore year? What were your goals and like?
Yeah. So a big thing that I knew with rowing too, especially kind of the longer you stuck with it and, inevitably to graduate as a student athlete, is that you can't get put on scholarship. And so that was one of my goals. I wanted to compete, and I knew sophomore year was going to be a year of growth where I could just keep getting better at the sport. And obviously the transition from novice to varsity is a hard one as it is. And that's something that our freshman coach really prefaced. And so a week after Big Tens, Big Tens was on May 15th. I played competitive soccer in high school and obviously in middle school, etc. And so I went back to play a game with this coach and with my sister, and within the first 30 seconds of playing, I tore my ACL. And so that was May 22nd, at like 1:30 p.m. But that was awful. So within the first 30 seconds of the game, I pulled the ball back and I stepped on my left leg and I heard 3 cracks and I was on the ground. And it was kind of a searing pain. And I kind of knew right off the bat that something was wrong. And
so what was your first like initial, what is the first thing that your mind went to when something like that happens?
The first thing that came to my mind was, I think, how much it hurt and how worried I was that I'd heard a crack, and just I knew, like, with anything with a knee, it can be anything from like a week to just years. And I knew, I mean, your ACL is always like kind of at the back of your head because I had good friends that had torn it in high school. And I'd seen how long it had taken them to rehab and to come back. And I'd also, one thing I remember being on the ground because I was like I wasn't crying, but I was like hitting my fist on the ground in just sheer agony. And I remember thinking like, I worked so hard this year. Like I am in such good physical shape. Like I knew how much I wanted to come back. And I did think about rowing too. And just because I knew how much I loved it. And yeah, I had to get carried off the field. And then I went to urgent care.
Okay. And so now you have torn your ACL and now you're into the fall semester, sophomore year. So what was that transition like mentally and everything?
Yeah, so this is, I think, kind of where my mental health took a turn. So then I got surgery June 22nd, and then I did PT in DC for the first 2 months, and then I got back to school in August. And one new thing kind of that you hinted at earlier is that to get onto varsity and to make varsity standard, we have a combine in which we need to run 4 miles, do 10 Bascom loops, and do a 6K on the erg, and then pull-ups. And so together with all of those things, we need to hit 81 points. And once you hit 81 points, that means you're on the varsity roster. And so usually like you want to do like the 4 miles, like an 8-minute average pace. You want to do the hills probably under 32 minutes. And then your 6K, you want to probably do it at maybe like at least a 2:01, if not lower, just to hit the bare minimum of 81 points. And so, there was kind of this new test to get on varsity, and something that I remember seeing that for the first time that summer and just breaking down sobbing because I knew that was something that I really would have enjoyed doing because I used to be a pretty good runner. And so that was kind of gut-wrenching. And so then kind of coming into the fall, I still walked with a pretty severe limp when I got back onto campus. And I remember kind of seeing all my friends and seeing them get ready, and it didn't quite phase me at first. I was like, well, I know it's kind of a long ways away, but I'd hoped that I'd kind of slowly start making the trek back. I just didn't know that I would just have so many setbacks.
Right. So can you talk about like sort of the setbacks that you had, sort of your everyday schedule with your injury and mentally how that took a toll on you, or some mindset shifts that you had?
Yes. So when let's see. So when I got back, I would say, to answer the first questions in terms of scheduling. So I had PT 2 to 3 times a week, and then I would have to see our athletic trainer 1 to 2 times a week. So I was in McLean 5 days a week. And then I was also at practice. So our practices start at 6 a.m. So we practice from like 6 to 8:30. And then we either have weights or another practice in the afternoons. And so I would go to all of those, and I would just be on land is what we call it. And so when, just because rowing obviously is a sport that you do on the water aside from the winter. So in the fall, the entire team would stretch upstairs in the erg bays, and then almost every single person would walk downstairs and go out and row. And so I would be inside with a couple other girls who were also injured, and we would just do a workout indoors. And so I'd have to kind of watch my entire team trickle downstairs and go outside and go to practice, and I'd be doing a very, very separate thing. So you feel very, very ostracized. And there's not a coach up there. Like, they don't really, I mean, you feel like no one cares what you're doing, and you feel like you're working to get back, but honestly, everything that you work for within rowing is for those 7 minutes at Big Tens, which you do your 2K. And so, like, every single day, that's what you're slowly gunning for. And so I felt like I was doing so much work and none of it was amounting to anything. And so,
did you kind of,
go ahead.
Did you kind of feel like you let yourself down a little bit, even though it was out of your control? Did you, that happened to you? Do you feel like you let yourself down a little bit?
I definitely feel like I was a failure. Like, I couldn't understand why it was taking me so long, and why I still had, let's say we were 4 months out, why I still had this significant limp, why I still couldn't get my knee fully extended. Like, a big thing with after you tear your ACL is that you want to ensure that your extension is back to 0. And so my extension was not there. And because my right knee was hyperextended, I had so many degrees left to attain before they could look equal and be symmetrical. And so I felt like, I was working so hard and just getting nowhere. And I knew that, I kind of knew in the back of my head, like, I knew how long the injury was, but I didn't quite understand why I felt like it was just taking so long. And I can see other people around me, you know, kind of take strides in where they were. Yeah.
So I think I can relate to this a lot because I was injured my freshman year. And I think a big feeling that I had was definitely isolation and like not feeling like I'm enough.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. So can you talk more about that and how that was for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's certainly kind of a key word that I use to describe how I felt was isolation. And I recognize too that I come from it. And I know I talked about you before this. I come from it from kind of a significant place of privilege that, you know, the most isolating feeling that I've had is something that there's no one really to blame. You know, it's not like it's not like, you know, it's embedded within our society that, you know, people are injured or a group that, you know, should be isolated. I mean, there are just so many acts of isolation around the world that are, you know, truly gut-wrenching. And so what I feel I recognize is a very privileged take on it. But I felt like, you know, you feel like no one cares about you, you know, whether it's like, because your teammates can't relate. Your coaches, you know, they're focused on the people who can actually contribute. You know, your friends kind of get sick of hearing you talk about it. Like you just feel like you're completely in the dark and you feel like you're alone and you feel like you're in such a long battle and it is just you facing it. And people can try and they'll check in, but in reality, like, especially, you know, kind of at kind of a D1 level, people really are kind of hyper focused on themselves. And so, you know, they'll try as they may to keep in touch with you and to check in with you. But really kind of at the end of the day, you know, people do want it for themselves. And so I think that I felt just completely pushed aside. And like, I felt like after coming off of freshman year where I felt like I did contribute, like I was just seeing the girls that were in my boat just take strides that like I could never amount to that year. And yeah, it was one of the worst feelings I think you could feel.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think something that I find a little bit interesting is, so you had this sense of team, right? Your freshman year, you had a sort of, here's my version like of my sense of team freshman year. And then all of a sudden that shifted a lot your sophomore year, your sense of team, like what I think of a team. What do you think happened with that? Like you felt your freshman year, you said you felt like a feeling like no other with experiencing all of this, but then like injury happens and now it's all shifted. So do you think your sense of like team shifted as well? Like
I feel like I think it was hard because I think like rowing in the team that I got from it freshman year, it kind of made the community that it made me feel like I belonged in this sport and also at this school. And so I think that I didn't feel like I was part of the team anymore, where like I couldn't do the combine, right? So I feel like I didn't earn my spot. You know, I couldn't contribute on the water. Like my times just were not amounting to anything because, you know, there wasn't really anything I could really work for realistically at this point. And so I felt like I really wasn't part of the team because I didn't really feel recognized. I didn't feel acknowledged. Like no one really saw what I was doing and thought that it was impressive, right? And then when I'd go to McLean, I'd see the football players, you know, and like a couple of them had torn their ACL. Like, I mean, people were like fawning over them. Like they had the athletic trainers were like kind of like in awe, like that they were doing it, and like they kind of knew they were the shit, you know, because it's a really, really hard thing to come back from. And I felt like none of that, you know. And granted, it's not like I didn't tear rowing, you know, it's not an injury, it's not a common injury rowing, but like you feel so unimportant and you feel like you feel so left behind. It's kind of like you're like, what am I still doing here? You know, because you felt like, and I'm like, I still don't kind of think people recognize how hard it is and how hard it was. Because now like people will be out for like a week and like, or like even like a month or like 2 months, you know. Gotcha. You know, they'll constantly try and compare it. They're like, oh, well, I got to be up here on land, you know, or I got to talk to the coaches, or like I got to go to the trainers every single day. Even last year, people were on land, you know, I would say for like a month with me, you know, for a variety of injuries. But the thing is, they also got, like, every single person got to go to Big Tens, you know, like I was the only one who was there for the entire year with 2 surgeries, you know, where they went inside my knee and changed things around. And like, I didn't reap any of the benefits, you know, but everyone kind of still thought that we were similar, but we were not.
So how was the coaches, like how were the coaches and how receptive were they towards your injury and how supportive were they?
Yeah, I think it's tricky because I think that with rowing especially, like there's kind of a hierarchy within the team, right? Like, so we race 5 boats at Big Tens within the varsity level. We race 2 8s and 3 4s. And so it goes from the 1B to the 3B4. And so I think that one thing that I think is tricky with the sport, and I think especially kind of once you get to this level, is that coaches certainly do have favorites. And I think it's hard because because I was a walk-on, like I wasn't recruited, and because although like I certainly made an impact freshman year, like, it was almost like starting over sophomore year, and I couldn't really show anything like to start over because I was just, I just wasn't able to. And so I think that they didn't really know me, and I felt like, and two of the coaches have actually left, but I felt like, no one really cared enough to try and know me. And like, I think they, and I feel like kind of people sometimes make an excuse that are, oh, well, our team is so big, but in reality, we have 35 people on varsity with 3 coaches, so you break that down, that's, 12 people a coach, which, I mean, that's pretty easy to ensure that you can check in with people. And I just felt like, I felt like I really, really didn't matter. And so I tried. So I talked to the head coach a couple times throughout the year, and I would update them every single week on my progress. But I felt, I didn't feel like anyone was rooting for me or anyone was respecting kind of the work that I was putting in. And I felt completely disregarded because, like, we had this thing called the Berg, which is like the bike erg, because when in the winter we do our fitness test on the erg, and if you can't do them on the erg, you do them on the Berg, so the bike. And so I did every single 6K and 2K on the bike. They just, like, it seems like the bike, even though they're pretty equal in terms of the times that you get, like, no one counts the bike. Like, we wouldn't be, like, we had these spreadsheets, and like you wouldn't be put on the spreadsheet. And so I think that was really hard because there was just a lack of attention. But I will say at the very end, oh my gosh, I had a really bad mental breakdown one night, and I couldn't fall asleep until like 2 a.m. And I was just sobbing, crying. And Ari was in, she didn't know what to do. She was just like, and so then I decided to write what I was feeling out, and I texted my head coach, and I said that I couldn't. I said that I couldn't be at practice tomorrow, and there were 5 mornings that I missed the entire year. 2 of them were because I met with a surgeon. 1 was because I had surgery, and then day after I took off because I had surgery, and then I took off that morning as well because I was just so mentally out of it. And so I met with her later that week, and I wrote her this long thing about how I'd been feeling, and I said I couldn't look at her, and then what I asked for in the end was I kind of wrote about how I was feeling mentally, and in the end I said, this was like April at the time, and so they were like deep into racing season, right? So I recognized like I was just very low on the priority list, but I had felt very low the entire year, and I was kind of fed up with it at that point. And so one of the things that happened with the combine is if you didn't do the combine sophomore year, you couldn't get your gear. And so I was never physically able to do the combine. So it was just like another kind of like symbol of like why, like another reason why, how I was not connected to the team, right? Like they all had kind of, we're sporting this new gear, and sure, I got the old stuff, but like, it was just another example of just how far removed I was. And so one thing I asked her, I said, look, like I want to show what I've been working for. Like I've been working so hard this year, and I want something to show for it. And so I asked her if I could do a modified combine and then get gear as a result. And she was very receptive, and she was very understanding. And so I really, really appreciated that. And she was super supportive. But she also made it very clear that this was not something that she would normally have done. But in that moment, like I did feel recognition, and I did feel seen. But it was an hour out of, 365 days.
Right. Well, I think I want to more talk about the mental health that you had throughout this. I know you can get into a very, very dark place. Yeah. And it's not fun. And it's sometimes there are different kinds of people. I think, personally speaking, I'm more of, if I'm in the dark place, it's very hard for me to get out. Yeah. And I lack motivation. I lack the need to do anything. So can you kind of talk about that for you and how that was like for you? Support systems that you had, all of that.
I mean, I think the way that, like, one way I can kind of sum it up that can kind of draw clarity is, like, it finally made me see, like, how people could get suicidal. Like, I could never really kind of conceptualize, like, and while I always had empathy and I could always kind of have a conversation, I felt like I could always, somewhat understand. I could never really think about how someone could get into that dark of a place, but it finally kind of cleared things up. I'm like, I get why people sell. Like, I get how it feels now to have such a lack of purpose and such a lack of motivation that you feel like you have no other outlet. And so that was a hard thing to kind of wrap my head around, because I truly felt like I had no purpose. Like, my grades took a massive dive for, the fall semester. Like, I felt like, because rowing kind of made up what my freshman year was and what my experience was like on school, and now it was completely changed. Like, I felt completely neglected. I felt, just like when you feel so unimportant, I think, and so isolated, and you feel like no one understands. I mean, you have no one to kind of rely on. And so I switched therapists. I got put on antidepressants that they just kept upping and upping the dosages which I had. And like, I would just go home and cry. Like, I couldn't get out of bed at some points. Like, I couldn't do my work. I felt like I was in such a dark place, and like, granted it was circumstantial, but it just because of like my running wasn't getting there. Like, I couldn't run. Like, I had this constant pain that I still do have pain today. Like, and then in late October, I had to have a second surgery on my knee, and I just felt like it was just constant time and time again. Like, I felt like I couldn't escape and I couldn't get out. And it probably wasn't until the summer and when I went home this past summer that I kind of felt like I was slowly kind of getting to the clear of it. But it was the worst year of my life. Yeah. And like, and my childhood was not perfect. Like, I've had to see and go through some really hard things, but it's you can't escape the feeling of being injured on a team like that.
Yeah. Do you feel stuck when you are in the dark place? Do you have motivation spurts? Like, what was your like day-to-day kind of
I say a lot
feeling?
of it was stuck. Like, I think a lot of the reason why I kind of get up, like, just because I just had to rely on my schedule. I'm like, okay, well, at least like I know I have to get up and go to practice. Like, I have to go to PT. And like, I knew long term that like I would get better, but like I really had no control over it. Like, it's not like I could, tap my knee and everything will be fine, and so I think that's one thing that's hard. It's like, it's not like I can just really study hard and like in 2 weeks and then I can get a better grade on this test or this exam. Like, it was such a long game. And so I think I've always been kind of intrinsically motivated, but it really, I don't know, it kind of tested my abilities. Like, I felt like I described it one way to a friend. I felt like I kind of really developed this like thick piece of like armor around me, and like every single day that I was injured and feeling that way, it was like someone was taking a knife and trying to chip away at the armor as hard as they could, and really trying to break it down. And so I think that, there were certainly spurts, and I honestly think kind of like the biggest motivating factors were the modified combine really held in April. And I would say we have a really amazing physical therapist at Wisconsin named Bailey, and I truly don't think I would have done it without her. Yeah. Like, I mean, she's kind of like, and I don't know how she does her job, because I know like she deals with so many long-term injuries with people, and I know that like kind of what I feel is I'm not the only one, and so she needs to be, a physical therapist, but as well, just like a therapist, quite literally in the mental health sense, to kind of say, what, like, you're gonna be okay. And she doesn't sugarcoat it, but she doesn't, she makes you kind of see every little victory.
So how are your relationships affected? Your support system that you had?
Yeah. I would say it was certainly difficult because of the relationships that had been founded a lot in sport. And so now, like, my friends kept wanting to talk about a sport that I just couldn't compete in and I couldn't partake in. And so, that kind of, and some people really didn't get it. Like, they weren't conceptually aware enough to know that I couldn't compete and I wasn't going through what they were going through at practice. And so we just kind of, sometimes you're just like stuck in this lull. And then it really kind of, I don't know, it brings a lot of clarity, especially in the summer when I initially tore, who reached out and who didn't, and I'll admit, like, I can hold a grudge, but like, sometimes I'm like, look, it is just so fucking obvious that like, I'm in this much pain and like, I'm like lying on my couch, like unable to get up, and like, no one comes and pays, and like, there are certain people that just they didn't text me, they didn't call me. I think I definitely felt, like, there were some friendships that I was like, I can really kind of see clear as day, what you think of me. And I took those to heart quite a bit. I think that it also, like, especially with some of my closest friends, like, they just didn't know what to do. Like, like, I know that, and sometimes I know, like, Ari, like, my best friend, like, she did not know what to do, and she's my roommate, and so she would just kind of see me day in and day out, and she just didn't know how to help me, because in the end of the day, like, there was very little you could do to help me. I mean, she couldn't fix what I was going through. She couldn't really offer empathy. She had this, like, foot thing, which, she tried to, I remember actually one time she came back, she's like, Severe wants to interview me about, my injury, about my foot. I was like, you're what? I was like, you gotta be kidding me. And then she's like, yeah, and so I don't know, like, just no one really knew what to do. And so I know my parents felt really bad for me. Like, I know, like, my mom cried, it's just like they felt really, really bad. But in the end of the day, like, you're kind of the only one. You're the only one in it. You're the only one. Like, it's a constant reminder. Like, every time I'd walk, I'd feel it. Every time I do something, I'd feel it. I could just be sitting down and I could feel my knee aching.
Yeah. So you talked about this past summer, right? How was that kind of changing for you? Or
I think it was definitely kind of like, I don't know, like, I felt a little bit more like myself. So I taught myself how to scull, which is like when you're rowing by yourself, with 2 oars. And so that was really helpful because I felt like I was slowly getting back. I was finally clear to start running. So, well, because I had a second knee surgery, because my extension wasn't where it was, I wasn't clear to run until December. I think I ran like Christmas Eve was the first time I ever ran. Yeah. So that was, I don't even know how much. I got my surgery in June and I ran in December. I think 7. And then all throughout the spring, you get put on this like return to running plan. And, so it starts off with like 1 minute every other day, and then like 4 minutes of walking. And then, and so blah, blah, blah. Anyways, so by the time I got to 30 minutes, I went in to see, we had this gait doctor at McLean. He like tore a bullet through my heart. He said like my running was just like, it was just so asymmetrical that he could not let me run for more than 10 minutes. And so that was in like April of this year. And so he put me all the way back to square one. He's like, you're only clear to run for 5 minutes a day. Really? For 3 days a week. And so, and that was just awful because, like, especially during, like, I ran quite a bit when I was in high school, and, maybe that was, like a little eating disorder, but, what can you do at the end of the day? But, I could go on, like 8-minute miles and just go for like, 5 to 8 miles, just holding a pretty solid pace. So I felt that running high that was just, it's taken away from me for that 7 months and then taken away again in April, when he completely retracted the amount of minutes I could do, just because of how bad he said that I would just get re-injured if I kept running the way I did, because I wasn't bending my left knee. And so then I had to go on top of PT, see a gait specialist every week. And so then by the time the summer rolled around, when summer started, I could run for 10 minutes 3 times a week. So that was in May, and I knew in September I'd want to do that combine without modification. And so I knew I had to get up to 4 miles at around at least like an 8:30 pace. And he said I couldn't run 4 miles by the time the fall rolled around, but he said it would just be really, really painful, which he was right. But I felt like in the summer, like I felt like I finally had control. Like the pain was not as bad as it had been in the past. Like I felt like I could make my own schedule. Like I didn't have to look around and see my friends doing these, doing all these different exercises that I just couldn't do. And I felt like I could say, okay, you know what, I'm going to reset. Like I'm going to start with the running. I'm going to build it back up. Like I know I can get back into shape. With that at least. And so I felt kind of, I didn't need to compete against those around me. I didn't need to compare myself. And so that was helpful.
Yeah. So how was that workup for you? So you went from running in the summer, you had to work up to 4 miles?
Yeah, so I started the summer only being able to run for like 30 minutes a week, right? So 10 minutes every other day. And then by the end of it, and then as summer slowly built on, like I'd say by July, like I would run like 2.5 miles in the morning, maybe 3 miles in the morning, and then do other cardio. And then in the evenings, I would go to the track a couple of times a week with my dad, and we would start, and I could, I was at like a 10-minute pace, maybe an 11-minute pace, because I physically couldn't go much faster. And then in the evenings, I would go to the track with my dad, and we would do 400-meter repeats at an 8-minute pace, just to really try and feel that out. And so I just kind of kept building on that until September went around, and I knew it wasn't going to be super strong. Like when I did the 4 miles and the 10 Bascums, and like I'd seen him, and he's like, well, he also said I plateaued and went actually, my running actually took a dive in the summer because I wasn't seeing him, but because he gave me all these exercises, which I did, but I don't know, whatever. Anyway, so he was like, it's going to be really, really painful. He goes, I don't know if you can do it. And I was like, well, I just have to, like, I can't start off again with not doing this combine and seeing everyone do it. And so then I did the combine, and I did the 4 miles. I did it at an 8:40 pace. And then
Which is good, right?
Yeah, it was like fine. It wasn't what I wish I could have done faster, but like, it was painful. Like I had a big sleeve on, like it was the best I could have done, I think, in that situation. I constantly compare myself to the person I was before I tore my knee.
I think that's something to be really proud of, though.
No, yeah, it is. And I was, and I am. But I think that like I still come at that place where I'm just constantly comparing myself to the person I was before.
Yeah.
And then, yeah.
Okay, so now we're here. So how do you feel like your mindset has shifted after the injury? Is your injury still... Are you still facing the day-to-day, like?
Well, I would like, I feel it right now. Like, I think it still is very achy, and like, I still feel like it still is quite inflamed at some points, especially just because we do so much volume with our sport. And so that's always a bit defeating, and there'll be times in which it really does hurt. Like, and especially if we do depending on what we do that day. Like there'll be nights like when I go to bed and the pain is at like a 6 out of 10 and I just can't sleep because it hurts. And so that still definitely happens. And I hope that will just kind of phase out as the time goes on. But I think now, especially after going through that and kind of in a way still going through it because I still go to PT once a week. I just got cleared by the gate doctor though last week. That was really exciting.
Congrats.
Yeah. But I think I think it's honestly kind of one of the greatest testaments that you can face as an athlete. Like, I think it made me better, and I think it made me stronger, and I think it's like nothing will ever compare to how hard that year was, And so you can look around and we can be doing, like really hard pieces and a really hard workout, but just I will choose that any day other than having to go and face a day in the life at which I did last year, just because of the mental agony and pain that you face both mentally and physically. Like, it was just the worst of the worst. And so I think that going through something that long and that debilitating, I think it makes you a better athlete. And I think it makes you, you just want it more. Like no one can really question how much you want it or how badly you want it because you stuck it out, And so I think that, I don't know, that I think that's a nice thing to fall back on because of like, and now you want it all to be worth it for something. Like I didn't work that hard, to kind of like slack off, like I want something to come of it, you kind of want that full circle moment.
So I don't know if you would agree with this, but at least for me, my perspective of myself shifted whenever I went through the injury. And now I have a completely different perspective of myself this year. Do you think you have that? Do you think you view yourself in a different way, in a better way?
I don't think I'm there yet. I think I'm very, very self-critical. And I there are kind of very few times in my life in which I'm actually proud of myself. And so like I was proud of myself for finishing that combine. And I think I've been proud of myself for how resilient I've been throughout the injury. But I don't think that my perspective of myself has changed. Like I think I'm just really hungry for more, like I don't want this to define me as being like, she never got back to the place in which she could have been because of this injury. And so I think that I want, I don't know how much of my perspective it's changed, but I feel like it made me grittier, and I feel like, it made me a more impressive athlete, but,
do you feel like you have gotten the quote unquote recognition that you deserve, that like the people are seeing the work that you have put in?
Not
really.
No. I know my physical, like Bailey does.
Yeah.
I know like Ari does. But, and I feel like, and like, I think like my dad does a good job of noting it. But I think that like right now I'm held to the same standard as those, as everyone else, which is fine. Like that's what I want to be, held to the same exact standard, right? But but I will also like I can never actually, realistically be at their level, at least right now, because I missed an entire year, so while I'm at the same standard, like I'm missing a year of growth and development underneath me, like at least in like the technical and fitness sense of rowing. And so I think that, I think that, I don't know if the recognition kind of will ever come. Like I know my friends, like yesterday we had a little scrimmage, and it was the first time that I had actually kind of competitively raced since freshman year Big Tens. And so like I felt like people were like, oh wow, like good for you. Like I think people, were impressed by that, but I think it's really hard for people to be aware because they have not experienced, like a 15-month injury and recovery. So, it's really hard to kind of conceptualize.
Yeah. Okay, so do you feel like, so I think the big takeaway is what lessons have you learned and all of that?
Mm-hmm. I don't know. I mean, I think I tested myself to a new ability. I think that I was able, I think I learned how to tackle just, and obviously this is a privileged manner of adversity, like it's not, and I don't mean to kind of like undermine what I went through, but, millions, if not, billions have fared a lot worse. And so I think that like, I learned how to navigate something that was just so debilitating. And like looking back on it, like knowing that it was the hardest year of my life, like I know that I made it through that. And so like, I recognize that, I recognized kind of how strong, I am now because of that, because of what I had to face. And so I don't know, I suppose it was kind of a very powerful lesson on resilience and on hard work and on grit, and just kind of, I think a big thing that I still need to do is just kind of be kind to myself and recognize like, change doesn't happen in a day.
Mm-hmm. And do you have like, are there moments where you are kind to yourself, where you do take a step back and be like, I did make it through this. I am proud of myself. I do have a lot of resilience. And does that help you like move forward in a better way?
Sometimes, yeah. I think I do a better job of it this year, honestly. Like sometimes if I have a really bad row that morning, or, if my running, sometimes we do like these, like I'd say like once a week where you had to run like 7 or 8 miles for one of our practices, usually in the afternoons. And so usually like I feel like I'm doing a better job now.
Perfect. I think that's a perfect place to end it.
Okay.
I think we did good. Fiona, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Hope you had a good time.
Thank you. I did.